you need a reason to wake up in the morning. You're retired, you got some money, but what's the point? And so you need a purpose, and you need, whether it's taking care of the grandkids or doing philanthropic work or whatever it is that excites you. But you may have the money, you may have a reason to wake up in the morning, but if you don't have the energy or your health to enjoy that series of years and decades, you got nothing. So when I think about putting together a program to be as healthy as we can during retirement, I start with the end in mind, which is, okay, so now I'm 60, now I'm 70. What do I want to be doing with my time? Do I want to be lifting up my grandchild? Do I want to be able to take airplane trips and take my rollerboard and stick it in the overhead bin? What are the things I want to do? Do I want to play golf? Do I want to be hiking on fairly aggressive trails?
Yeah, and one of the things that I think I've noticed as I age is that fear creeps into your life, fear and anxiety, and with regards to physical abilities and confidence. And if you do these things, you can more confidently engage in activities where you don't fall. I remember I'm an emergency physician, and falls are a huge part of what I see in the emergency department. Head injuries, hip fractures, and what people think is a simple hip fracture where you fix it and get back to life is actually a life-threatening event. Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Becky, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your hosts. We're here to help you with your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting from.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm Bill Yount with my co-host Becky Heptig. And Becky, how's your health today?
Well, my health is better than it's been for the last few weeks. Thank goodness. I've been a little under the weather with respiratory stuff for a couple of weeks. And then how's your health today?
Well, yeah, you caught me on a bad day. I got food poisoning. I was up all night with a GI clean out and left me exhausted yesterday with poor sleep, poor diet, poor exercise, all of the things that we're going to talk about today with our guest.
That's right.
And maybe you want to take us down the road to introduce him.
All right.
We'll jump into the show.
I'm looking forward to this today. We are going to talk about our health and wellness. And that's something that we don't always talk about in terms of our money. I mean, a lot of times we're talking about numbers and money and what we need to do and the strategies and the optimization, but our health throughout this is so important. So today we're talking to Dr. Bobby Dubois. Dr. Bobby is a Harvard grad with a medical degree from Johns Hopkins. Bobby did his residency in internal medicine. He has a PhD in health policy from the Rand Corporation, and he has published 200 academic peer-reviewed publications. All right, that's Bobby's credentials, but this is the part I like best. Bobby is a physician scientist focused on figuring out what works for patients and what does not, and then designing the healthcare system to pay for and support you in getting what works and avoiding what does not work. He's always been entrepreneurial and wanted to find ways to help patients and the system and help companies financially succeed by doing the right thing. Bobby has worked with managed care, the pharmaceutical industry, the electronic records companies, and most recently in helping to guide a health policy think tank in Washington, D.C. Bobby retired 2 years ago. He is fitness-oriented, ran marathons for a decade or so, then Ironman triathlons. I'm so impressed, Bobby, and interested in being as healthy as possible. All right, Dr. Bobby Dubois, welcome to Catching Up to FI.
Well, thank you for including me, and it's a set of topics that are near and dear to my heart.
Well, what's interesting too is you are retired and you've been retired for 2 years. And we just found out that you run a ranch, sort of a health and wellness ranch. Can you tell us about that mission and how that is sort of the purpose, identity, and connection in your retirement? Because you talk about a three-legged stool of finances, purpose, and health. Tell us about your purpose.
Well, my wife likes to say that I didn't actually retire, I just changed careers. We lived in LA for years and years and years, and there was a long story of how we ended up here in the Austin area 10 years ago. But suffice it to say, we lived on a 50 by 110 lot in LA, nice house, but tiny lot. And now we have 178 acres of a ranch, and allows us to be outdoors with exotic animals and 6 miles of hiking trails and two-thirds of a mile of a creek. And we looked at each other and said, we want to share this with others because many, many, many people don't have a chance to experience that. And so we sort of started a bed and breakfast, and then we kind of realized, well, wait a second, the kind of theme of what we do here is all about the wellness stuff that we're interested in, where you can exercise and eat well and get a good night's sleep and be in the yoga studio and meditate or do some yoga and then take a cold plunge or a hot experience in a sauna and be with family and just nurture in nature, which is sort of our tagline. And we realized, wait a second, this all kind of comes together. And so, yes, the ranch life, I never met a chainsaw 5 years ago. And now I have many of them. And Gail and I are taking care of trees and burning brush and doing all sorts of things. But it does challenge us physically. And it's really a wonderful way to experience what we do and have our retirement, such as it is, retirement versus whatever.
That sounds amazing, Bobby. I think that I need to figure out a way to come experience that. Stephen and I are from Texas, and so sometime when we're down there, we may come knock on your door. It sounds wonderful.
We at Madrone Springs Ranch welcome you and anybody else. You can just find us on our website.
Right.
Well, we talk a lot about financial means. Retirement seems to be about the numbers. It seems to be about getting your ducks in a row so that you can drink Mai Tais on the beach traditionally. But that's not the way it works. You've told us about your reason to wake up in the morning, but what happens if you don't have your health?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And for your audience, they have woken up and realized, wait a second, my financial house isn't fully in order at the age of 40 or 50, and I've got 10, 20 years to get myself ready. And when I think about retirement, you absolutely need the financial wherewithal to see you through the years or decades that are ahead of you. And you need a reason to wake up in the morning. You're retired, you got some money, but what's the point? And so you need a purpose, and you need, whether it's taking care of the grandkids or doing philanthropic work or whatever it is that excites you. But you may have the money, you may have a reason to wake up in the morning, but if you don't have the energy or your health to enjoy that series of years and decades, you got nothing. I mean, I would argue it's a three-legged stool where the health part, the energy part is the most important. I mean, you can manage with less financial means, but if you're miserable and can't do what you want to do, it just doesn't work. And so my passion really is to help people get ready. Don't wait until you're retired. Get ready and focus on your health at the same time you're focusing on the financial means and beginning to think, what will I do with all those hours during retirement?
I think that is so important. And for whatever reason, especially when we're in the throes of trying to get our numbers right, we're so focused on that, or we're so busy at work and we're stressed and spending too many hours at the office or whatever it is. We just don't think about our health. We kind of set that on the back burner and think, I'll get to that one day. And sometimes the one day never comes. So I'm really anxious to dive into this. So why don't you step us through the things that you've got here that we should be thinking about in order to really get our health in order?
Well, and the good news, Becky, is that there are things that are in our control, and there are six of these things, and we can talk about each one in turn, and they're very much based upon science. My whole career was based on what works and what does the evidence say works and what does the evidence say it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the things I'll talk about, there have been randomized trials or other really significant work that shows that these are effective in helping people. So, sort of disclaimer, these tools can't solve all problems. Your genes are important, and bad luck happens. You can get in a bad accident and that'll impair your ability to feel as good as you want to be. But there are a lot of things that we have control. And so the six that we'll walk through, I think, together, the first is exercise, getting a good exercise program that both helps us aerobically and strength-wise. The second is getting a good amount of high-quality sleep is extraordinarily impactful on how long we live, how well we feel, and the risk of cognitive decline, which is really an element that many, many people worry a lot about. The third is nutrition. And as you'll learn from me, I'm not a big nutrition person in many ways, but there are a few elements that are critical. The fourth is mind-body work. It can be as simple as breathing exercises. It could be yoga, it could be meditation. There's science behind what it does for you. The fifth is exposing yourself to heat and cold. Sauna and cold plunges and cold showers have real benefits on the body, and let's talk through that. And the last is one that we may lose sight of from a health standpoint, and that's social relationships. And as we'll talk about, it is the single biggest predictor of people in their 50s as to whether or not they'll live into their 70s and 80s and whether they'll have a high quality experience. But by focusing on these six, I think we can both live long and hopefully live well. And it's never too late to start, and it's never too early to start. And let me just cite a statistic that after the age of 30, we lose about 2% of our muscle mass each year. And if you just do the math over a number of decades, you will lose a substantial amount of muscle mass, which allows you to be functional moving forward. And so if you don't get ahead of the curve, you've heard the term use it or lose it. I like to say overuse it or lose it. If there are things you want to do in the future, you better get overwhelmingly stronger at those today, because that will deteriorate over time.
Every time I hear that statistic, Bobby, it makes me depressed because it's like, wow, that started decades ago in my life, but I'm glad to know that there is something we can do.
Absolutely.
And this is the term I use all the time when I'm talking to people about money is pay attention. If we pay attention, then we can do something about this. So how do we counteract that loss of muscle mass?
Sure. And before we dive into the first one, which will be exercise, I just want to let folks know, if this is a topic of interest, there's some wonderful podcasts that you can listen to. One is Peter Attia, MD. Another is Huberman Lab, Andrew Huberman from Stanford. Both of these are excellent. They're different in the approaches they take. They're very much based on kind of what do we know from the science that supports the things that they talk about. And so if people want a weekly dose of reminders of what to do and how to do it, these would be good places to keep.
Well, I want to jump in here too and take a step back, because you talk about exercise and all these six things, but you talk about them in an umbrella of functional health. Now, some people may not like this term or actually really understand this term, but I like it. And it really does wrap up. It's a wrapper for all of what we're talking about. Can you define that term and how it relates to what we're going to talk about in these six steps?
Sure. So, functional health, I think, is the sort of second half of living long and well, which is paying attention to the function of your human body. So, I'm a devotee of Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. But one of those habits is start with the end in mind, kind of like, where are we going?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do I get there? Okay, I figured out where I want to be, but now I got to figure out how to get there. So when I think about putting together a program to be as healthy as we can during retirement, I start with the end in mind, which is, okay, so now I'm 60, now I'm 70. What do I want to be doing with my time? Do I want to be lifting up my grandchild? Do I want to be able to take airplane trips and take my rollerboard and stick it in the overhead bin? What are the things I want to do? Do I want to play golf? Do I want to be hiking on fairly aggressive trails? Each one of those activities requires a different function. Lifting up a rollerboard over your head is completely different than having the balance to be able to walk on a slightly rocky, uneven hill. And chasing after a grandchild who is supposed to be right next to you in the parking lot and they're in a dangerous situation is a completely different set of muscles and functions that we have to think about. So I'm a strong believer that you don't just have a generic program. Each one of us has different vision of retirement, and we need to think about what muscles, what aerobic capability do I want to have 10, 20 years from now? And just like compounded interest, you want to put money away early and it's going to pay dividends later. You want to start doing these things early and it will pay dividends later.
I love that. It sounds really good because you can create a circuit. People talk about circuits in the gym, but you can create your own design circuit. And it becomes important in each of these 6 areas, which we want you to take us through now.
Perfect. So exercise. It is the single best, strongest, most scientifically supported lever or activity that will help us maintain our functionality, reduce our likelihood of dying, reduce heart attack, reduce stroke, and reduce mental deterioration. It is the single strongest. Now, the problem is that people are like, okay, so I'm supposed to do 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise a week. Okay, maybe I'll go to the gym once a week. Now I'm done. Well, there are actually 4 components of a good exercise program. The aerobic is what we talked about. And yes, you want to do a number of hours a week, and it can be walking briskly. It can be playing pickleball. It can be doing a variety of things. Basically, get your heart rate up for a period of time. But that's not enough. And you need to do strength training. It doesn't mean you got to go to the gym. I mean, you can get a couple of dumbbells or kettlebells or milk bottles that are full of milk, and that will work in your body weight of doing lunges. But strength training focused on what do you want to be able to do is critical. Anaerobic bursts of effort, which may only be a minute or 2 or 3, but are really important. It could be running flat out on a road or being on a treadmill or being in a Peloton class and doing some of the hit hills stuff. But a few minutes of very vigorous exercise a few times is all you need to maintain that part of your body. And then balance and flexibility. If you're one of the people that wants to be able to walk up steep hills and that are a bit wobbly, then figure out what kinds of balance activities you can do and flexibility things that you can do. But it's all 4 of those, not just one alone, which is what will give you what you need when retirement begins and beyond.
Bobby, I have personally experienced a couple of these. And of course, as your body changes as you age, sometimes I'm getting mad at it because I used to could do this and now I can't. But a couple of months ago, my husband and I were in Bali and we were seeing some beautiful sights, but we were walking in places where the stairs were definitely not ADA compliant. They were made out of mud, they were made out of rock, they were uneven, they weren't the same height. And I really experienced the fact that my balance has changed as I've aged. And I think overall, what I've experienced is I didn't realize how things were going to change. And now I have to think about it.
Now you have to think about it and you can plan for it.
Mm-hmm.
So if these are things you want to do, you need to work on them when you're in your 40s and when you're in your 50s, and obviously continuing to do it in your 60s and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say enough about exercise. We obviously have 5 other things we're going to talk through, but this is one that's worthy of dedicating some time in your life, as busy as your life can be.
How do you get the most bang for your buck? Have you found that there's particular exercise, say rowing, that covers a lot of these bases in one fell swoop? Or is it really a matter of creating a circuit?
I think there are a few. If you run, and that is one of the things I do, you're focused on your legs. You're not getting a lot of arm or shoulder or even that much core work. Because so much of what we do is linear, we run forwards. Very rarely do people gallop sideways or run backwards. So that kind of linear activity is fine, but it doesn't prepare you for all the things that you need to do. Rowing, as you mentioned, can be a pretty full body exercise, which is great. Swimming is another one, which allows you to do a lot of things, but it doesn't sort of obviate the need to do the balance work, the flexibility work, Becky, that you were talking about, and some of the focus strength work. So I think those are great aerobic activities, but we have to think more broadly.
Gotcha. And I've heard you talk before about some of the things you mentioned earlier, like running after your grandchild in the parking lot, and I've heard you talk about being jostled in an airport or whatever, that those require some side to side strength that we don't think about working on sometimes.
Absolutely. I have a trainer because I can't get myself to do the strength work that I need to be doing. And this helps me to keep on track. But she was showing me a couple of brief things on the treadmill, which I hadn't done before. So if you have access to a treadmill, try walking backwards on the treadmill. That's a whole different experience, both from a balance standpoint and a muscle standpoint. Do keep your arms on the bars because you could fall. So that's the first thing. Do it very, very slowly. And the second is to walk sideways on a treadmill. And that's a whole nother experience, walking to your left and then turning around and doing it to the other direction. These are wonderful because they challenge you in ways that you're not used to. Yes, you can, of course, do this on the road, but the problem is you could fall. The beauty of a treadmill is that you can hold on while you're trying to do some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are all sorts of ways that you can help your body get ready for the future.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think I've noticed as I age is that fear creeps into your life, fear and anxiety, and with regards to physical abilities and confidence. And if you do these things, you can more confidently engage in activities where you don't fall. I remember I'm an emergency physician, and falls are a huge part of what I see in the emergency department. Head injuries, hip fractures, and what people think is a simple hip fracture where you fix it and get back to life is actually a life-threatening event, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the percentage of people that die within a year of a hip fracture is a very, very high number. Now you have the chicken and egg problem. They fell because they were ill and they were going to die because of that, versus it was actually the trauma that caused them to then become more sedentary, have problems, develop pneumonia, and die. So there's a bit of chicken and egg, but absolutely it's a critical issue.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, we got a lot to go through, so we better move on to number 2. And this one is near and dear to my heart. You talk about sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep is, I think, an underappreciated risk factor for heart disease, stroke, cognitive decline, depression, and a whole lot of other things, weight gain, you name it. So if you go back to the 1940s, Americans got close to 8 hours of sleep. That was standard. When I say average, that means half the people got more than that. Now, when you do surveys, on average, people get less than 7 hours. Well, and it turns out that 7 hours is sort of the magic number where the studies, and there have been many, many of them, show that the folks that get less than 7 hours of sleep, a whole lot of bad things happen related to mortality and related to quality of life. So we are in a world where we're getting fewer and fewer hours. And Bill, as you were sharing earlier with us, that doing emergency room shift work or any type of shift work, especially when you rotate the hours, you're on day shift, you're on evening shift, you're on night shift, just makes that ability to get the sleep so much more difficult, and the quality of those hours of sleep are so much more impaired. So I think the first issue is to raise the awareness that sleep is not a nice to have. It is a life-saving and life-threatening issue if we don't get it. And so I want to raise folks' concerns. Now, for folks that are interested, since we're only going to talk for a few minutes about sleep, there's a wonderful book by Matthew Walker. It's called Why We Sleep. And he goes through all the justifications of the benefits of sleep, what happens in your brain, what do we do about sleep, and all the bad things that can and do happen when we don't get enough sleep. Everything from if you don't sleep well one night, your ability to learn is highly impaired the next day. Your likelihood of eating more than you think you should is very, very high. And then if this goes on a regular basis, the difficulties with cardiac disease, stroke, cognitive decline become way more risky. And you cannot make up for it. So if you have 5 hours of sleep on average during the week, and you say, well, I'm going to get 10 hours on the weekend, that's great, but it won't undo all the damage that not having enough sleep can be.
Yeah, my cumulative sleep deficit will never come back. I mean, it's like your biggest resource is time. You can't get back time. It marches forward, and you can't get back sleep. It's catastrophic. I can't avoid it. It's the nature of the beast for me. But when I don't get sleep, I'm a different person. I have less reserves. I have less empathy. I can't tolerate stressors as well. It's a challenge. You can sleep more, as you said, later, but that doesn't work.
It really, really doesn't. And you're in a particularly challenging situation with shift work and being in the ER, which is stressful, so you can't immediately turn off the light switch of your brain and jump into bed. But for people who have a somewhat more regular life, hopefully they will now realize they better prioritize sleep. Now, the good news is that there are ways to promote good sleep, because a lot of people say, well, I have the time to sleep, but then I don't sleep well, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't go back to sleep, or I wake up early in the morning. So it's not just the time and that, it's that it just doesn't happen the way I will like it to, and I don't sleep the way I did when I was 16. Now, none of us do, but there are real things that we can do to help with our sleep. So first, when you get up in the morning, if you can, get outdoors and get some sunlight, whether it's walking your dog first thing in the morning or just walking to work or spending a little extra time wandering around. Sunlight in the eyes early in the day is really helpful to reset your circadian rhythm or set your circadian rhythm, which will pay dividends when it's time to go to bed. Exercise. Here's yet another argument for exercise. Exercise has been shown to improve sleep. Third, and this is one that people don't appreciate, and boy, has it made a difference in my life. Try to go to sleep at the same time every night. I get to bed by between 9 and 9:30 every night. Even when I'm not tired, I force myself to say, time to go to bed. And lo and behold, I actually do fall asleep, and I fall asleep pretty quickly. But going to sleep at 9 one night and 11 the next night, what ends up happening is you'll wake up at the same time in the morning, but get wildly different number of hours of sleep. The fourth, and this is remarkably effective, have a cool bedroom. I know it uses more energy during the summer, but if you get your bedroom down to 70 degrees or below, it will make a major difference in your sleep. Meditation can be very helpful for a lot of people, and some sort of hot experience before you go to bed. Hot shower before you go to bed, a sauna before you go to bed. It also goes along with the cool bedroom, kind of counterintuitive. You're making your body hot, but what happens is all your blood vessels dilate. And so once you get out of that hot shower, you're dissipating heat, and it actually will cool your body off. So these are positive things to incorporate. And then there are things you want to not do or try not to. Eating an hour before bed is not going to help your sleep, and it's really going to make a problem. For some people, caffeine is a big issue. Even like for me, if I have caffeine at 8 in the morning, I won't sleep at night. So I'm highly sensitive to caffeine. And many people, I have my last cup of coffee at 11 or 11:30. That may be affecting your sleep. Next, alcohol. We all love our wine and our whiskey and our whatever. Realize that you will pay a price with your sleep. And if people like, I shouldn't have a martini for lunch, but I would argue you should on the weekends, because then the alcohol will be mostly out of your system. Having some wine with dinner and after dinner will interfere with most people's sleep.
Bobby, I don't understand that, because doesn't alcohol make you sleepy? I mean, that's kind of what I thought.
Okay, so you're asking a fabulous question. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned is wearables, Oura Rings, Fitbits, Whoop things, even your Apple Watch. There are many, many devices that you can wear that will monitor your sleep and give you not perfect data, but a pretty good sense of how much light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep you're getting. And the beauty, and this is one of my big mantras, is with all these health things, you should be your own laboratory animal, and that you should test out what matters to you. And sleep is a perfect example for this. So let's say you have an Oura Ring or one of these things, and you monitor it for a couple of weeks, and you say, okay, I'm getting a certain number of hours, and here's the amount of REM sleep and deep sleep. And boy, it doesn't look very good. So then try some of these things. Okay, I'm not going to drink alcohol for the next couple of days. Okay, does it make a difference in my sleep? Okay, I'm not going to eat after 6 p.m. Well, does it make a difference in my sleep? And you now have a way to measure it. Alcohol affects everybody differently. What's very typical is that you will fall asleep rapidly. Oh, I'm so relaxed. I've had all this alcohol. I want to go to bed. And you will fall asleep quickly. But two things are likely to happen. One is if you look at the data on your sleep patterns, you won't get the same amount of deep sleep as you would if you hadn't drunk alcohol. And here's the problem I get. I fall asleep brilliantly, and I'll wake up at 1 in the morning and I won't be able to go back to sleep. And if I don't drink alcohol and I wake up at 1 in the morning, I just drift right back to sleep again. So that's what happens to me. Now, some people get up to at 1 in the morning because they need to go to the toilet. Well, one of the things you want to not do is drink a lot of fluids before bed. And for some people, as we get older, our prostates don't work so well and our bladders aren't working as well as we might. You might want to stop drinking fluids at 6 p.m. and see if that makes a difference. All of these things are brilliant because you can test them And you might say, well, it has no impact on me, and so I'll go back and have fluids at 8 p.m. Great. Electronics before bed, not a good idea. And if you find you're not falling asleep or you wake up and you can't get back to sleep, don't toss and turn for more than 20 minutes. Get out of bed, go do something, and then come back and try to go to sleep. So the beauty of sleep is once you realize it's important, there are real things that you can incorporate in your life, things to do, things not to do, that really, really make a difference. Mm-hmm. And you can test it and see if it works for you.
I love that. And I have discovered some of these for myself. I don't drink anything after 8. I try not to eat anything at night. Now, one thing that I don't get, because I'm one of those that does wake up in the middle of the night and I have a hard time going back to sleep. So why do you suggest getting up rather than staying in bed and trying to go back to sleep?
I am not against laying in bed, but I wouldn't lay in bed for too long because what ends up happening is you start to feel anxious, you start to worry you're not getting to sleep and you need to be rested in the morning, and then that drives people crazy. So for those people, I would say get out of bed and go kind of do something. But for some people, here's one that my wife invented, and I tried it, and it's like, oh, wow, this actually works. So I'm 67. And my urinary system doesn't work or didn't work as well as it used to. I'd wake up at 1 a.m, and the first thing that would hit my mind was, oh, I better go to the toilet. So I would trot down the hall, go to the toilet, come back, and now I'm wide awake. And my wife came up with this idea. Just tell yourself when you wake up that you need to, and your brain says, I need to pee. Tell yourself, no, I don't. And you'd be amazed. Within 5 or 10 minutes, you're back to sleep and you really didn't have to pee. It wasn't that you woke up because you had to use the toilet. You woke up and you thought you need to use the toilet. So just tell your brain, no, I don't need to. Everybody's worried I'm just going to pee in my bed. Trust me, it won't happen. And give yourself that 5 or 10 minutes and you may find that you don't have to get out of bed, because once you do, you may become wide awake and it becomes a real problem for certain folks.
So what about sleeping aids? That's not on your list, but a lot of people take melatonin, they take Benadryl, they'll take a benzodiazepine or Ambien. Do you find that these help or do they hurt?
Well, melatonin, if you look at the studies, and we'll talk about this a little bit with nutrition, there's a very good website called examine.com, and they summarize the evidence on vitamins and melatonin and nutraceuticals. And it's a good kind of initial place to say, is there any real evidence? Melatonin has only been shown to sort of improve sleep by 10 minutes. So out of 7 hours, it doesn't do a whole lot. Now, if you're changing time zones, that's a different story. So probably the melatonin isn't all that effective for most people. Again, you can try it. My wife uses Benadryl. That seems to help her. When you get into the prescription stuff, it's a slippery slope. It may work for a couple of nights and then it really becomes a problem and you have a hard time getting off it, and it becomes less and less and less effective. Some of these things help you fall asleep. The one that's the hardest is people that wake up in the middle of the night. Those sleep aid things don't seem to help keep people from waking up in the middle of the night. Trazodone is an old-fashioned antidepressant, which helps some people because it makes you drowsy. And that's something you can talk to your doctor about.
Gotcha.
All right. After sleep becomes nutrition. And you have very controversial thoughts on this. A lot of fads out there. Take us through your thoughts on nutrition.
Yes, I'm more skeptical about nutrition. Now, I believe very, very, very strongly that we need to maintain a good weight. 1/3 of Americans are obese. Add to that the number that are overweight, and it's a huge issue. It's the number one cause of diabetes. It leads to heart disease. It leads to cancer, all sorts of things. The problem is there is no magic diet. All diets work, until they don't. And then all diets don't work. So whether you are a believer in intermittent fasting or the paleo diet or the Atkins diet or the low carbohydrate, low sugar diet, they work because they help you focus on your calorie intake. And they stop working when you no longer are as cognizant about the number of calories that go in. So I believe in the physics of this. Calories in, calories burned. And there is no magic thing that if I eat these foods, then it'll make a huge difference. No, it's basically total calorie intake and output.
That's very similar to the basics of our money issues. When you boil it down, it really is very simple. You need to spend less than you make and save the difference. So, and the same thing with our nutrition. If we want to lose weight, we've got to burn more calories than we took in.
That's right. And mostly it's hard to exercise your way out of it. So it really is, intake is a critical piece of the puzzle. And it's getting harder and harder because the diet industry has gotten amazingly good at making foods we want more and more of. And foods are increasingly calorie dense. So let's say I put on your plate a nice simple piece of chicken, some broccoli, and a sweet potato. Now, the reality is you'll probably eat that and you won't crave more and more and more food because they're simple and they don't have salt on them. And there's only so much broccoli that you're going to want to eat. And there's only so much naked chicken breast you're going to want to eat. But now if I took those foods and I said, I'm going to add some salt to this, and it'll come in Parmesan cheese. I'll put some butter and some cream and make a chicken Alfredo sauce. We're going to put it on that same sweet potato, but you'll probably eat 3 times the amount because there is this evil triad of fat, carbohydrates, and salt. Okay, hard to eat too much broccoli and meat. Turn those same type of ingredients into either ice cream or pizza, and there's no stopping most people. And the food industry has figured this out. And so all of these foods that are processed, Hamburger Helper, even protein bars, they've figured out if we can put the right ratio of carbs and fat and sodium, people will eat more and more and more of this. So that's one of the big problems is that processed foods allow us to eat way more calories than if we just put some Brussels sprouts on your plate without salt, without butter, some fish, and again, a sweet potato or something like that. So it's very difficult. And my recommendation for most people is avoid the aisles in the market and just shop the perimeter. That's where you'll find the sort of unadulterated vegetables, fruits, and meats. And it will help you a lot in maintaining, hopefully, a healthy weight. Protein is critical. So unlike the recommended daily allowance, which is a tiny amount of protein, only about sort of a half a gram per kilogram of body weight, I think most people need about 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. For somebody like me, I weigh about 150. So it's going to be about 100 grams of protein, 120 grams of protein. If you're a smaller woman, maybe 60 to 80 grams. But that's critically important to help us.
So what about the people who are vegetarian or vegan?
Well, vegetarians have the opportunity of, in most cases, having eggs and cheese. Vegans, it's tough because to get the right amount of protein is a real exercise in proactive thinking. So if you're a vegan and you feel strongly about it for environmental or animal issues, that's fine, but you really, really have to concentrate on getting your protein. I'm a carb lover. It would be very, very easy for me to have oatmeal in the morning, have pasta for dinner and a salad with a little bit of something on it for lunch. That's basically zero protein over the course of the day. And that's what I love. I love carbs. So for me, it's a conscious effort. I'm not vegan or I'm not vegetarian, but I consciously think about having cottage cheese in the morning, having some meat with my lunch, and then having a backbone of my dinner be some sort of protein.
Okay.
Well, you also, I mean, my wife takes a lot of vitamins and supplements. You have a bit interesting thoughts on this as well in your diet, so to speak. Can you tell us what you think about supplements?
Well, there was a recent CDC, U.S. Preventive Services Task Force summary of the evidence on supplements. And this ranges from vitamin D and omega-3s and beta carotene and kind of all the things you hear on TV. And basically, they found that there was no evidence to support that these helped you live longer or live healthier. Now, there are some people that have real deficiencies in a nutrient. By all means, those people need some. But to hear people say, oh, yeah, I always take omega-3s and I do athletic greens or whatever, those things. There's no data to support that it works. And I'm a very evidence-based person. So people yell at me and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but go to examine.com, go to the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force and see what you learn. But there really is no data. I would love it if omega-3s and those kinds of things and drinking lots and lots of red wine to get resveratrol, I wish that would reduce the risk of chronic disease. It doesn't seem to matter.
That's $1 billion industry also, isn't it?
Multi-billion dollar.
Wow.
But I'm not against pharmaceuticals when they work too. I mean, the new weight loss drugs is a whole nother discussion. Maybe we can have it another time. But they can be highly effective in helping people lose weight. Now, there are downsides associated with them as well. But I think I'm not against really focusing on ways to keep our weight where it needs to be because it's so terribly important.
And what's interesting too to me is you talk a little bit about salt and other things like that. And people hear, oh, if you eat too much salt, it can affect your blood pressure. But in this scenario, you talk about the N of 1, where what's true for me is not necessarily true for anybody else. What does N of 1 mean? And why is it so that I can eat salt and not affect my blood pressure and others struggle with it?
Absolutely. N of 1 means basically there's one person in the study, and that person is you. And we all care about ourselves more than everybody. So why not study ourselves? Just the way we talked about sleep. Figure out if alcohol makes a difference. You're wearing your Oura ring or whatever else it is. You can do the same thing if you have blood pressure issues. So I have blood pressure issues, and I have a home blood pressure monitor. Costs all of $90 at CVS. It's not a major investment. So test your blood pressure every day, a couple times a day for a week, and then say, okay, I'm going to cut out salt in my diet for the next 2 or 3 weeks and see if it makes a difference. Because it turns out genetically, some people are salt sensitive and some people salt makes zero difference. I happen to be one of the salt makes no difference people. Now I have to take a blood pressure pill, so I can't just solve the problem with salt. But I love salt. And if I had to cut out salt, I'd have to have a pretty strong justification. I should. And so by testing yourself, adding salt, reducing salt in your diet, you can see if you're one of those people who's salt sensitive or not. Similarly, when your doctor says, oh, you have high cholesterol, and you are like, okay, I'm not going to have any more saturated fats. I'm cutting out meats. I'm cutting out all the things I love. Well, some people are fat sensitive in their diet and some are not. A lot of this is your genetics. So again, now this one you'd have to do with your doctor because you'd have to get an occasional cholesterol test, but spend 6 months on a low fat, low saturated fat diet. If it doesn't change your cholesterol, go back and eat what you want, because you're probably going to end up on a statin or something like that. But if you are very, very food sensitive, From a cholesterol standpoint, well, then you have a decision to make. Do I want to cut out those foods? Do I want to be on statins? Do I want to do a combination of the two? We're all different. The beauty of an N of one trial is you can be scientific about what affects you and what doesn't. People love the term personalized medicine. You can do it for yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's not that hard to do by just getting a journal and keeping some notes and writing it down.
Exactly.
I do that. I mean, I write my weight down every day. And some people may say, oh, you shouldn't obsess over that. Well, I don't think I'm obsessing over it, but I see trends and I can tell if I do X, then the next day my weight has changed. So I'm going to have to make a decision. Do I want to do X or do I want to not do it next time? So, yeah.
Right. So study what happens in your own lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great way to go.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right. We've covered a lot of the typical things, but there's some what people think sometimes are guru things, and you refer to mind-body work. Take us through how that impacts our health.
So these are all things we can do to live longer and live well. So mind-body work is a broad kind of catch-all that can be yoga, can be meditation, it can be breath work or qigong. It can be just walking in nature. There've been some great studies looking at people's cortisol levels and blood pressure levels and anxiety levels. And some people walked in the neighborhood where there's traffic and noise, and other people walked in a park, and they measured to see what differences there were. And there are real differences. So doing this on a daily basis, a few times a week basis, really helps. Not only things like anxiety and depression, but it's been shown in a British study, it reduces blood pressure, reduces risk of cardiac death. And these can be simple. I mentioned the Huberman Labs podcast. Andrew Huberman has a nice podcast on a type of breath work, 5 minutes. It's called sort of the accelerated sigh or enhanced sigh. Basically, you take a breath, take a second breath on top of it, and then you sigh. So something like this. And you do that slowly for 5 minutes. And in his research, that is more powerful than any other breath technique, and it takes 5 minutes. It's an absolutely scientific thing. It affects your vagal stimulation, and it will make a difference. And that's 5 minutes. And you can do that when you're standing in line in the grocery store. You don't have to go in a dark room and do these kinds of things. Something is better than nothing. And it really helps. It lowers your cortisol levels. We know cortisol is a sign of stress and inflammation, or can cause inflammation. And these are very simple. There is data to support them. There's not like 30-year trials of comparing people, but there's pretty strong data that this works.
Yeah, and you mentioned walking in nature, and I'm a big fan of that. And we have dogs that we love to walk in parks and in the woods. And the Japanese actually have a term for this, and I don't know the Japanese word, but it's called a forest bath, which is kind of like a forest sauna, so to speak. And
I love it.
And these are blue zones, right? And if you look at all of these things that you're talking about today, I dare to say that we'd find them in the blue zones of the world, which are like Sicily or Okinawa, where people live to 100, right?
Absolutely. There's a wonderful Netflix series on living to 100 and talks about the blue zones. And it's a very interesting, and many of these principles that we're talking about here are just incorporated in the daily lives of folks in these parts of the world that tend to live quite older ages and being very functional in those older ages.
All right. The next thing we're going to talk about, I cringe every time I hear you talk about this, the exposure to hot and cold. So tell me why I need to do this.
Well, my wife actually is a big fan of this.
Oh, I'm a fan of the hot side of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but she does both. In the morning, she takes her shower, but at the end of it, she turns it on ice cold.
Oh.
And then in the evening, she jumps in this sauna that you've heard about on the podcast many times before, the proverbial sauna bath. And then in other countries where they have the cold plunge, and Sweden after a sauna, uh, these are real deals. And what kind of impact does this hot cold transition have on our health?
Yes, I mean, one could argue, well, they've been around for 1,000 years, so there must be some good associated with it. And the Russians and the Scandinavians, they go in their saunas and they roll around in the snow. But there's actually really, really good evidence that sauna a few times a week for 20 minutes or so reduces the risk of heart-related deaths and likelihood of dementia by 20, 30, 40%, depending upon how often you do it. And there's a study after study suggests that saunas really can be helpful for folks. Now, not everybody has a sauna. Gyms often have saunas. And if you can find your way into one periodically, I think it's great. The cold plunge is more democratic. Everybody can do it. We have a cold plunge tank. And so that's something not everybody has. Somebody may have a pool in their backyard, and during the winter, it sure as heck is going to be cold. But if you have a bathtub, you can buy some ice and just toss it in and climb in. Or as your wife does, Bill, you can turn the shower down to very, very, very cold. The data on cold plunge is more recent. Now, people have been doing it forever, but they haven't done as much scientific study. We don't know the long-term benefits of cold plunges. What we do know is that in the short term, there's a 6-fold increase in dopamine levels. And dopamine is sort of the happy hormone in your chemical in your brain. And if you jump into an ice bath or a cold plunge, you will be happy for hours. It's not just minutes, it's hours afterwards. And it's clearly related, or we think it's related, to the dopamine secretion in the brain. So there's a lot of reasons to do it. It is not something that everybody can do every day, but if it's available to you, I would seriously think about it.
I don't have a problem with the hot side. I could do the hot with the cold. Oh my gosh.
The cold is very difficult, but after a minute, a lot of that panic goes away,
Uh-huh.
and it isn't as terrible for the next couple of minutes. And you do get a little more acclimated to it. Not that it's easier,
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't frighten you or bother you quite as much as it does in the beginning.
So how long would we need to do it? Like my choice would be just to turn my shower to cold. So how long should I do that?
Well, I do the cold plunge for 3 minutes.
Uh-huh.
My wife does it for longer. I did it before we just started this podcast, and I was shivering for about an hour. So I get hypothermic in 3 minutes. My wife can be in there longer, and she doesn't get hypothermic. And it's a little hard to know with the shower because the shower is only sort of shooting on part of your body.
Uh-huh.
But if you can do it for a couple of minutes, I think it's great.
Okay. I'm going to try. I'm going to promise I'm going to try.
Give it a try. Give it a try. Look, you can't do all of these things all the time, but give it a try.
Yeah.
This sounds like a full-time job. I mean, some of us are just working, and it's hard to incorporate this in our lives. But if you prioritize them, I guess you can take a lot off the list.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We've got one left. And I love this one, the social relationships. So tell us why that's so important.
Well, nobody likes to be lonely. Everybody likes to, well, most people like to have others around. But I'm an evidence person. And Harvard has been doing a longitudinal study for 60, 70 years now. It's called the Harvard Study of Aging, Adult Aging. And they looked at a million different things, and they started this 70 years ago. But one of the most fascinating things is that when they looked at people in their 50s and said, okay, what's the greatest predictor of living to be in your 70s and beyond and being functional in your 70s and beyond? What they found is it wasn't exercise, it wasn't smoking, it wasn't your cholesterol levels, it was whether you had satisfying relationships, meaning people that you can share the ups and the downs of life. And that people who had those, and that's a strong characteristic of the blue zones, they lived longer and they were in a much better position when they were older. So it turns out to be a critically important element. And as we age, sadly, we retire and all those friends at work often don't continue. Folks die, we lose a spouse. All of these things tend to shrink the number of social relations. And we as men aren't so good at making new ones. And we really have to pay attention to it and try to add more relationships in our life, because some of those will go by the wayside as we age. So it's terribly important to think about and to try to do something about.
Well, a lot of people geo arbitrage. I mean, I know Becky did this and move away when they retire from where they've lived for 20, 30 years and created a bunch of relationships. And it can become, I think, really hard to reestablish those. Becky, was that hard for you?
It was, in a way. It takes time and it takes effort on your part, being proactive. We're always part of a church, and so that is one way to create new relationships. But whatever it is, I mean, it could be a Sunday school class, it can be the golf buddies, it can be, for me, it would be a quilting group. I found that if you join something that you are interested in, then you have a built-in set of friends. And for all of us that are sort of in this financial independence or FI space, there's a lot that we can take advantage of with that. In fact, recently Brad Barrett on CUtFI interviewed Stephen Boyer of CUtFI, Amy Minkley of Financial Freedom Retreats, and Diana Merriam of Economy. And we've had two of the three of those, or will, on our podcast. They have created live events, and Brad was talking to the three of them about the advantage of that. And they talked about not just learning about your money, but creating relationships. And that's happened with us. I know, Bobby, you and I were at Roger Whitney's Rock Retirement Roundup in Fort Worth in the fall of 2023. And there was a little bit of talk about a group that I'm a part of that we've come up with a goofy name for ourselves. We call ourselves the Slackers. But we met online because of our mutual interest in financial independence topics. And we have started traveling together, meeting in person. And I mean, I never dreamed I would have a group of friends like this in retirement. And we don't even live in the same states, but we have become so close and so meaningful. And this is the group I can call at 2:00 in the morning if I need to. So I definitely have seen the result of how important what you're talking about is.
And for me in this community, I've started virtually with a lot of folks in the FI community.
Mhm.
And then we've met at these conferences. I mean, Becky and I started this podcast before we even really knew each other or had met. And she's since become one of my best friends. So, and as a man, as you mentioned, it can be really hard to create new relationships. And for me, I find great joy in the virtual relationships. Yes, they're not of necessarily the same quality, but do you find that these virtual communities, now that we have this access to technology, have kind of the same impact as the traditional neighborhood church-based relationships?
Well, we don't know. This is a 70-year study, so we might have to wait another 70 years. So I don't know. These virtual relationships. Okay, so let's take a half step back. Why might relationships help us from a longevity standpoint? Well, you could say chemically, it reduces our stress, reduces our cortisol. So if you're able at a virtual level to share the ups and the downs in a deep way, maybe it'll have the same positive impact. If the virtual relationships are really just, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, but not get into, I'm having difficulties with my wife and they're like this, and I need to share this with you because I'm so unhappy about it. If you can do that through virtual, then perhaps it will provide the same benefits.
That's hard. Even as close as our Slacker group has become, it didn't really go to that level until we all saw each other in person. and spent time together in person. When we went to a CUtFI and we rented an Airbnb for the 3 days ahead of the CUtFI, and the 9 of us spent those days together, getting to know each other, doing activities, having a great time. And we came out of that with a completely different relationship than what we had had when it was only virtual.
Fantastic.
So we've covered a lot of ground, and we're coming to the end of this show, but we want to wrap it up with some concluding thoughts that you might wish to share to sort of summarize what we've learned today.
Well, I think just like thinking about your finances, I think it's important to think about your health and get ahead of the game and start working towards what we would like our life to be now rather than waiting. The good news is there are 6 different activities we can do that evidence shows will help. Be kind to yourself, take baby steps, and you can leverage these. For example, when I'm in the sauna, I'm often there with my wife, so I'm working on social stuff. I might meditate or do breath work in there. So you can do 2, 3, or 4 of these at the same time and not feel like I have to spend 3 hours a day on this. Now, so take a walk with somebody in nature, talk, get closer, and do a few at the same time.
I think this is great. And this episode is airing here at the beginning of the year. This is going to come out either late January or early February. And I know at the beginning of the year, we're all thinking about New Year's resolutions, and everybody thinks about, oh, I need to get healthier. But a lot of times those ideas fall away as we get busier and we get back to sort of our normal life after having gone through the holidays. So, do you have a suggestion for folks to be able to stick with this, to think about these 6 topics that we've talked about? And I know for me, one of them probably would be to take the baby steps, to not expect everything to change at once. But what advice would you have for somebody who wants to get healthier and they want to stick with it?
Start slow. Don't feel like you got to do all of these every day. And make a list. Just have it up on your mirror and just remind yourself, okay, maybe today I'm going to try to work on my sleep and not eat late in the day. And tomorrow I'm going to think a little bit about getting a little bit more exercise. And then the day after, I'll think about something else. And gradually, hopefully, these will all get incorporated and they'll be fun. Make them fun. Don't make it difficult. If you're going for coffee with a friend, go for a walk. Don't sit in the Starbucks. Get your Starbucks coffee and go for a walk. Try to incorporate it in your daily life as much as you can.
But you got to drink your Starbucks before 11 in the morning.
Absolutely, if it's going to affect your sleep.
The walk has to occur then too. I mean, what you've outlined for us is really kind of like the Dave Ramsey of personal health. It's also the Stephen Covey of the 7 habits of highly effective people. But these are the 6 habits. This is a checklist. And I think it's very helpful for folks that have New Year's resolutions and want to have a framework to approach them and think about them. I want to thank you greatly for taking us through your list and your work in this area. I do look forward to coming out to your ranch sometime and taking a moment to work on these things at a pause, as opposed to trying to incorporate them into my busy life of shift work and no sleep.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Bobby, how can folks connect with you if they want to learn more?
Well, I recently wrote a blog that really walks through these. So if you want to have something in writing to help you, just go to madronespringsranch.com and go to the blog section and you'll find it. If you want to know about the ranch, you can just look there. You can follow us on Instagram and all the crazy things we're up to. It's at Madrone Springs Ranch. So those are possible things that folks, and you can always just reach out to me directly through the website.
Right. And folks can also hear you from time to time on Roger Whitney's podcast, The Retirement Answer Man, also, correct?
Absolutely. I do a monthly segment with Roger And we talk through one of these topics or some other thing that relates to this.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to listen to a summary of these kinds of thoughts, there are 4 episodes in May of 2022 where you take us all through this. And in addition to a few other things like how to access healthcare, that becomes, okay, what happens when this falls apart and you need sort of more traditional medical services? But that's a talk probably for another day. We've reached time here, and we value your time. And Becky has to jump on to another call, and I've got to go get some wisdom teeth taken out. So let's wrap this up here today, and thank Dr. Dubois for his time with us. We'll hopefully get a chance to talk with you again.
Yes.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This has been great. Thanks, Bobby.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to 5. We would appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
We are not lawyers, financial advisors, accountants, or tax experts. Please consult your own professional advisors before making any important decisions. Our content is for entertainment and education purposes only.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to 5.